My project is about the Potala Palace, which is a sacred Buddhist site located in Lhasa, Tibet. The palace is found on a mountain called Marpori, also called the Red Mountain, in Lhasa. It is 3,700 meters tall, which is over 12,000 feet. It is the highest ancient palace in the world. I chose this site because I recently learned about the conflict between China and Tibet and wanted to learn more about Tibetan religion. The people of Tibet follow Tibetan Buddhism. Buddhists follow the teachings of the Buddha, meaning the Enlightened One. Originally known as Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha renounced his role of being a prince and chose to live a simple life without material possessions. With meditation, he became enlightened and understood how to be free from suffering and achieve salvation. The Buddha teaches how to achieve nirvana through his Four Noble Truths. Nirvana is a state of spiritual enlightenment in which one becomes free from worldly desires and has transcended the cycle of birth and rebirth. The Four Noble Truths say that desire and ignorance cause all the suffering in the world, and that the way to end suffering is through the Noble Eightfold Path. This path includes right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. One does not need material possessions or wealth in order to be happy. They can achieve happiness through the Buddhist teachings. Buddhists place value in leading a moral life, being mindful and aware of thoughts and actions, and developing wisdom and understanding. Buddhists also believe in karma, which is the idea that our actions have either positive or negative consequences. It emphasizes the importance of taking responsibility for our actions. Furthermore, Buddhists believe that wisdom should be developed with compassion. Buddhism is a universalizing religion, which is a concept that I will explain more later. There are three main types of Buddhism, and within these there are many different sects of Buddhism. The focus here is Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is important to Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama is believed to be the embodiment of the Bodhisattva Chenrezig. Bodhisattvas embody different degrees of enlightenment, and Chenrezig is the Bodhisattva of compassion. Dalai Lamas help rule the Tibetan government. However, the current Dalai Lama retired in 2011 from his position as head of state. The Potala Palace came to be considered sacred over a period of time. Before the palace was built, the mountain was a meditation retreat for Emperor Songtsen Gyampo, the founder of the Tibetan Empire, during the 7th century. The emperor meditated here because it was believed that the Bodhisattva Chenrezig could be found in a cave on this mountain. The emperor subsequently built a 9-story palace on the hill and named it Potala, after a sacred hill in India dedicated to the Bodhisattva Chenrezig, called Mount Potala. Another legend claims that he built the palace to greet his bride, Princess Wenchang of the Tang dynasty. The structure we see today is the result of additions built in the 17th century. The Potreng Karpo, or White Palace, was built between 1645 and 1648, during the reign of the 5th Dalai Lama, Losang Gyatso. Between 1690 and 1694, the Potreng Marpo, or Red Palace, was built. It required thousands of workers, artists, and craftsmen. The 13th Dalai Lama renovated the building in 1922. The palace is now considered the symbol of Tibetan Buddhism. The palace has many different parts to it. The two main buildings are the White Palace and the Red Palace. The original buildings built by Songtsen Gyampo are conserved in 2 sacred chapels. The White Palace is the living space for the Dalai Lama. It was painted white to convey peace and quiet. It contains offices, living quarters, and the seminary for training priests. The Red Palace contains many shrines and chapels, including the Saints' Chapel, which dates to the 7th century and is considered the holiest shrine of the site. Below this chapel is a cave called the Dharma Cave, in which Songtsen Gampo studied Buddhism. There are 3 galleries in the Red Palace, which hold murals and sculptures. The many murals are made in the traditional Tibetan style. There is also the tomb of the 13th Dalai Lama, built in 1933 as a stupa, which is a commemorative monument. You can only go there with a monk or a guide, and many people make devotional offerings to the deceased leader. The physical landscape is important to this site because the palace is placed on a mountain. Mountains are very important to Buddhism. This is because they tend to be removed from towns and urban centers. In Buddhism, being in nature, separated from society, makes it easier to meditate and to reach enlightenment. Thus, mountains tend to be regarded as sacred, as do other places such as rivers and forests. Furthermore, the 3 main mountains of Lhasa symbolize the 3 protectors of Tibet. The Potala Palace stands on Morpori, one of these 3 mountains, adding to the importance of the placement of the palace. The cultural landscape is important to this site because it holds the cave in which Songtsen Gampo is believed to have meditated. It also holds the tomb of the 13th Dalai Lama and has been the living quarters of many Dalai Lamas. Additionally, the site has a lot of artwork that is tied to the history of Tibet as well as Buddhism. Incorporated into the architecture are decorative paintings, carvings, jewels, and ornaments. Thus, the palace has become an important pilgrimage site for Buddhists. The history of the site, in addition to the shrines and chapels, draw thousands of people every day. There have often been over 5,000 visitors in just one day. However, in 2003, a quota of 1,600 people a day was introduced in order to avoid overcrowding. Buddhism is a universalizing religion, meaning that Buddhists actively seek converts because they view themselves as offering belief systems of universal appropriateness and appeal. Buddhists seek to spread the knowledge of the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path so they too can achieve enlightenment. Because anyone, regardless of age, gender, race, or social status, can follow these teachings, the religion is equalizing and therefore attractive to individuals who may be oppressed by religion. For instance, Buddhism was in part a response to the rigidity of the strict caste system, which is tied to the religion of Hinduism. The palace is an incredible feat of skill and craftsmanship, and is beautifully adorned with art and riches. Thus, the development of this sacred site can be viewed as a method of attracting new followers to Buddhism. Because it is such an impressive structure, it can be understood as a way of bringing many people to the site who may convert to Buddhism. So far, the site has been successful in attracting many people to come and visit. The Potala Palace symbolizes Tibetan Buddhism, and it therefore is associated with certain religious conflicts in Tibet. It can be associated with the historic persecution of non-Buddhist Christians in Tibet, which has occurred under the rule of the Dalai Lama. However, the Potala Palace tends to be more often associated with the more recent conflict between Tibet and China. Tibet has been oppressed while under China's rule and wishes to have independence from China, but the Chinese government seeks to continue to control the region. China has suppressed Tibet's culture, freedom of expression, and worship. Over the past several years, China has instigated invasions, occupations, and anti-Buddhist thought reform. In 1950, the People's Liberation Army invaded Tibet. The estimated death toll is over 1 million. Since then, there have been protests and uprisings in Tibet against the People's Republic of China. After the 1959 uprising, the 14th Dalai Lama fled to India for safety. The Potala Palace was slightly damaged during the Tibetan uprising against the Chinese in 1959 when the Chinese threw bombs into the palace's windows. However, the damage was not extensive. The Chinese Cultural Revolution in 1966 has resulted in the destruction of many Buddhist monasteries, libraries, and artifacts. The Cultural Revolution was meant to encourage communism by removing the traditional and cultural elements from Chinese society, including those having to do with religion. People were taught that Buddhism was superstition, and Tibetan Buddhists were forced to destroy their own monasteries at gunpoint. The Prime Minister of the People's Republic of China in 1966 personally intervened during the Cultural Revolution in order to keep the palace safe from destruction. Despite these efforts, thousands of scriptures, historical documents, and works of art in the palace were removed, damaged, or destroyed. The possibility of the safety of the palace seems to be in the hands of the rulers of China, who appear to have the most power in protecting the sacred site. The potential for resolution of this conflict is not clear. The People's Republic of China wishes to continue to control Tibet because the region is viewed as a buffer zone between China and India. However, the Tibetan people will not continue to stand for the oppression they are facing under the rule of the Chinese government. The last large-scale protest was in 2008, though smaller-scale protests occur daily. The Chinese government has taken part in talks with the Tibetan government, though these talks do not appear promising. The Dalai Lama wishes to have autonomy for Tibet, but China fears complete separation. Thus, the hope for resolution in the near future is unlikely because neither party appears to be able to compromise. This site has impacted the surrounding cultural landscape. Although the palace itself is meant to be separated from any urban areas, hotels and town centers have been built in Lhasa near the sacred site to house the many visitors that the site attracts. The site has also impacted the physical landscape. The great numbers of people that the palace attracts has added to the already present environmental problems in Tibet, which include deforestation. The physical landscape does not appear to have had a significant impact on the palace, but structural damages to the building have occurred due to the many visitors that come each day. For instance, visits to the roof were banned in 2006 to avoid further structural damages. The site itself represents the beliefs of Buddhists because the palace is placed on a mountaintop. This desire to be closer to nature and apart from society is a method Buddhists use to meditate better, and therefore have a better chance at enlightenment. Thus, the location of the site is the most significant representation of the people's beliefs. Additionally, many people come to visit the tomb of the 13th Dalai Lama, who embodies the importance of compassion in Buddhism. Furthermore, the many murals depict elements of Buddhist belief, which is another reason Buddhists may come to the site. However, it is important to note the contradiction between Buddhist teachings and the site of the Potala Palace. Buddhist teachings claim that only with the rejection of desires can one eliminate suffering and achieve enlightenment. Thus, Buddhists are taught to avoid craving pleasure and material goods because these are wants that cannot be satisfied, and therefore it can only lead to more desire and more suffering. In addition, Buddhists are taught to avoid ignorance because ignorant minds lack insight and thus cannot grasp the true nature of things. Ignorance can lead to greed and envy, which in turn causes more suffering. The lavishness of the Potala Palace seems to contradict these important teachings. The building contains adorned carpets, canopies, and curtains, as well as jade and fine objects of gold and silver. It seems contradictory that the symbol of Tibetan Buddhism is a structure full of riches, since Buddhists are taught to reject worldly possessions and other objects of desire. This project has helped me to better understand and appreciate attitudes towards sacred space. The conflict between China and Tibet has endangered the Potala Palace, and many sacred and historical documents have been destroyed in the uprisings. This shows me how important it is to protect sacred sites even in times of conflict. The suppression of Buddhist thought by the Chinese government using propaganda is a blatant violation of individual freedom, and the protection of the Potala Palace as a sacred site symbolizes the endurance of religious freedom even in the face of oppression. Because the Potala Palace is sacred to Buddhists, it should be protected to avoid further destruction in the future. The physical and cultural landscapes make the site historically and religiously important to millions of people. The palace needs to be protected so that people's religious freedom is also protected.